At 69 years old, Mary made a decision everyone called madness. While her husband, after decades of marriage, demanded in court every cent of the mansion where they'd lived, Mary did the unthinkable. She simply pushed the keys across the table and walked out, taking nothing but a suitcase and a piece he would never understand. "You'll regret this when you discover you have nowhere to go," he shouted. But what he didn't know was that Mary was returning to the only place where she'd truly been happy, an old forgotten house in the suburbs that he considered trash. Stay with me until the end, because you'll discover what happened when Mary opened that door after 30 years. What she found hidden between those walls, and the way she transformed what remained of her life into an empire of affection, left her ex-husband and the entire neighborhood speechless. You're about to see that sometimes letting go of everything is the only way to finally gain what truly matters. And if stories of courage and new beginnings inspire you, subscribe to Dreams Don't Age, where we share real stories proving it's never too late to reclaim your life. The courtroom was smaller than Mary had imagined, but the weight of what was happening there felt enormous. She sat in a wooden chair that creaked every time she shifted, her hands folded in her lap, trembling slightly despite her efforts to appear calm. Across the room, her husband of 42 years sat with his attorney, a sharp-dressed man in his 30s, who kept glancing at his phone between moments of whispering strategy. Robert hadn't looked at her once since they'd entered. Not once. After 4 decades of marriage, of building a life together, of raising their son Daniel in the beautiful home they'd purchased when he was just a baby, Robert couldn't even meet her eyes. The proceedings had been going on for 3 months. 3 months of lawyers and depositions and financial disclosures and arguments over who deserved what from a marriage that Robert had decided quite suddenly was over. He'd filed for divorce on her 69th birthday. She'd woken up that morning expecting maybe breakfast in bed or at least a card. Instead, she'd found divorce papers on the kitchen counter of their mansion next to her coffee maker, with a note that said simply, "I need to be free to find myself before it's too late." Free, as if their entire life together had been a prison. The mansion they'd lived in for 35 years was worth approximately $3.2 million. Robert wanted it. All of it. His lawyer was arguing that since Robert had been the primary earner throughout their marriage, he'd been a successful investment banker, while Mary had chosen to stay home and raise Daniel, he deserved the lion's share of their assets. Mary's lawyer, Patricia, was fighting back, but Mary could see in her eyes that the fight was uphill. The judge looked exhausted by the whole proceeding. Mary understood that feeling. She was exhausted too. Exhausted by the anger, the accusations, the way Robert's lawyer kept implying she'd been a burden rather than a partner. But she was most exhausted by something else, by the thought of Daniel, their 38-year-old son who lived in London with his wife and 2 children, being pulled into this mess. Daniel had been calling constantly, begging them to work it out, to go to counseling, to remember what they'd once meant to each other. Every call broke Mary's heart a little more because she could hear the pain in her son's voice. During a recess, Patricia pulled Mary aside. "I think we can fight this. We can argue for equal distribution. You gave up your career to support his. You raised your son. You managed that household for decades. You deserve half of everything." Mary looked through the courthouse window at the parking lot, where Robert stood smoking a cigarette and talking on his phone, probably to the girlfriend Mary suspected existed, but couldn't prove. "What will it cost?" Mary asked quietly. "The fight. What will it cost Daniel to watch his parents destroy each other in court for the next year?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "It will cost him. It will cost everyone." Mary made her decision in that moment. Not because she didn't deserve better, not because she thought Robert was right, but because she had one thing left that mattered more than marble floors and prestigious addresses. She had her dignity, and she had her relationship with her son. When they returned to the courtroom, Mary did something that made Patricia gasp. She asked to speak. The judge granted permission. "Your Honor, I'd like to renounce my claim to the marital home and accept a settlement of $100,000. I believe this will allow us to conclude these proceedings quickly and with minimal continued conflict." The courtroom went silent. Patricia grabbed her arm. "Mary, you can't—" "I can," Mary said quietly. "And I am." The judge looked at Mary with something that might have been pity or might have been respect. "Mrs. Harrison, I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. You're renouncing rights to a property worth over $3 million in exchange for $100,000. This is legally binding once you sign." "I understand, Your Honor. I'm 69 years old. I don't have time left to spend years fighting over things. I'd rather spend whatever time I have left building something new." She signed the papers with hands that shook but didn't hesitate. Robert stood as the proceedings concluded. For the first time that day, he looked at her. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice cold. "When you realize you have nowhere to go, no one to take care of you, you'll regret giving up everything." Mary met his eyes calmly. "I'm not giving up everything, Robert. I'm giving up nothing that matters. There's a difference." She picked up her purse and walked out of that courthouse into afternoon sunshine. In her purse was a key she'd been carrying for 3 months, a key to a house she hadn't visited in over 30 years. The house where they'd lived when Daniel was born, a small 3-bedroom in a middle-class suburb, 40 minutes outside the city. The house they'd kept, meaning to sell it but never quite getting around to it. The house that Robert called that dump and had forgotten existed. The house that Mary had quietly, carefully kept in her name alone through a trust her father had set up decades ago. The drive to Maple Street took 45 minutes through traffic. These were small houses, most well-maintained but modest. Chain-link fences instead of stone walls, cars in driveways instead of garages, children's bikes lying in yards. She pulled up in front of number 47. The house was small. 1 story, maybe 1,200 square feet, with white siding that had gone grey with age, and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. The yard was overgrown, the mailbox hung at an angle, and several windows had shutters that were missing slats. It looked abandoned because it had been. Mary carried her suitcase to the front porch. The key was old, brass, worn smooth. It had been on her keychain for decades. She slid it into the lock. It stuck, but eventually gave way, and the door swung open. The smell hit her first. Stale air, dust, a hint of mildew, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw past the decay. High ceiling, hardwood floors under debris, wooden benches, windows letting in shafts of light. This was real in a way the mansion had never been. She walked through the house slowly. The kitchen where she'd made Daniel's birthday cakes, the bathroom where she'd given him his first bath, the bedroom that had been his, with the growth chart marks still on the doorframe. She traced those marks with her finger. 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, all the way up to 6.5 years old. The master bedroom destroyed her. She sat on the dusty floor. This was where they'd been happy. Where they'd made plans late into the night. They'd been poor then but happy. When had that changed? She couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had been gradual, like erosion. That night, Clara slept in a sleeping bag in Daniel's old room. No electricity, no water working yet, no comfort. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt alive. Mary woke to sunlight. Her body protested the hard floor, but she started exploring. In the hall closet, she found a box. Daniel's first pair of baby shoes. A photo album from his first year. Some of her old teaching certificates. A Valentine's card from Robert dated 1985 that said, "To my beautiful wife, every day with you is a gift." She sat on the floor with these items and remembered being 27 and terrified and so in love. The doorbell made her jump. A woman in her 60s stood there holding a casserole dish. "Hi, I'm Margaret Chen from next door. I saw someone moving in yesterday and thought I'd bring a welcome dish." Mary stared. When was the last time a neighbor had brought her food? "Thank you, that's very kind. Are you renting or buying?" "I own it. I lived here years ago and I'm starting over." Margaret's expression shifted to understanding without pity. "Welcome home. If you need anything, I'm at 49. After Margaret left, Mary sat with the casserole and that Valentine's card and those baby shoes and she realized something profound. She'd spent 30 years accumulating things, but somewhere in all that accumulation, she'd lost what mattered. This house had her son's first steps marked on a doorframe, and memories soaked into the walls, and neighbors who brought casserole. Mary ate straight from the dish, and it was the best meal she'd had in months. 3 days later, Mary was on her porch when Robert's Mercedes pulled up. "This is where you ended up?" He didn't say hello. "This is where I chose to be." "Mary, this is ridiculous. You're 69 years old. You can't live like this. I'm living just fine. I talked to my lawyer. If you come back, we can revisit the settlement." "I'm not coming back, Robert." His expression hardened. "When you run out of money, what then? You think you can survive on Social Security?" Mary set down her coffee carefully. "I survived raising our son while you worked 100-hour weeks. I survived managing a household on your starting salary when we had nothing. I survived your midlife crisis and your divorce papers and your girlfriend who's probably younger than our son. I think I can survive this." "There's no girlfriend," he said, but his eyes shifted. His phone rang. The caller ID. "Victoria." "You should go, Robert. Victoria's calling." He left. Mary sat shaking with satisfaction, but his words stuck. The settlement money wouldn't last forever. What was her plan? Margaret appeared with coffee. "Ex-husband? That obvious?" Mary found herself telling Margaret everything. "You're the bravest person I've met," Margaret finally said. "But brave doesn't mean you have to do it alone. This neighborhood takes care of its own. My grandson's a handyman. Mrs. Patterson runs a community garden. The church has a job board, and I make a mean pot roast on Sundays. Why are you being so nice? I know enough. You chose peace over possessions. That's all I need to know." Mary started making calls. To utilities. To Margaret's grandson about repairs. To Daniel to say she was okay. And to the community college about photography classes. For the first time in decades, she felt exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 weeks later, Mary had a routine. Mornings working on the house with Tom, Margaret's grandson. Afternoons at the community garden Mrs. Patterson ran. The garden became her sanctuary. Raised beds of vegetables, a greenhouse, composting bins, a tool shed painted cheerful yellow. Mrs. Patterson was 73 with incredible energy. The secret is staying useful. The minute you think you're too old to matter, you start dying. Mary started showing up 3 mornings a week, pulling weeds, watering, harvesting. The garden introduced Mary to people. Marcus, a veteran who grew herbs. Yuki, a young mother with twins. Father Michael, who maintained roses. They talked while they worked. Those small conversations filled something empty. One Saturday, Mrs. Patterson made an announcement. "What if we made the front section a community space? Free vegetables for anyone who needs them. Honor system. Take what you need, give what you can." Over the next 2 weeks, they transformed that section, putting up a cheerful sign. Mary found herself going daily, not just to work but to see who stopped by. Single mothers, elderly neighbors, teenagers. One afternoon, a woman about Mary's age stopped by, looking hesitant. "Is it really okay to just take some?" "That's why it's here." They talked while Mary helped her select vegetables. The woman, Linda, had been widowed 6 months ago and was struggling. "You know what you need," Mary said. "A cooking buddy. Someone to share meals with. I'm at 47 Maple. Come by Monday evening." Linda came Monday, and Wednesday, and Friday. By the 3rd week, it was understood. They cooked together 3 times a week. Other people started joining. Margaret, Mrs. Patterson, Marcus with chili, Yuki with Japanese recipes. Mary's house slowly filled with thrift store furniture, mismatched but cheerful. When people sat around that table, laughing and sharing food, it felt more like a home than the mansion ever had. One evening, Daniel video called from London. "Mom, it looks like you're actually cooking." They chatted, Daniel clearly delighted to see his mother looking happy, covered in flour and surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a kitchen being used. "He's worried about you less now," Linda said after. "I think I'm worried about me less now too," Mary admitted. The mansion had been beautiful but empty. This house was full, but alive. She'd thought she was giving up everything. But standing in her small kitchen with flour on her hands and friends at her table, Mary realized she hadn't given up anything that mattered. Tom, Margaret's grandson, had become a regular fixture. Then, one morning, he showed up with someone else. "Miss Mary, this is my Uncle James. I mentioned you needed carpentry work on those cabinets." The man who stepped forward was probably in his mid-60s, with grey hair, warm brown eyes, and hands that showed years of work. "James Patterson," he said. "Related to Mrs. Patterson from the garden? So I'm being taken care of by the entire Patterson family?" "Pretty much," James said with a smile. James examined the kitchen cabinets. "These are original to the house, good bones. They just need love. I could teach you how to refinish them if you're interested." "You'd teach me?" "Why not? It's not hard, just time-consuming." They started the next week. James would come over after work, and they'd work on the cabinets together. He taught her how to strip paint, how to sand, how to apply stain. They'd work for 2 or 3 hours, then Mary would make dinner and they'd eat together. She learned he'd been widowed 8 years ago, that he had 3 grown children, that he loved jazz and woodworking and terrible puns. He was easy to talk to, easy to be around. One evening, 6 weeks into the cabinet project, they were sitting on Mary's porch with iced tea. "You know what I appreciate about you?" James said. "You don't treat me like I'm too old to be useful. My kids are always trying to get me to slow down, retire fully. You can worry about someone and still respect their choices." They sat in comfortable silence. "Why did you give up the mansion?" James asked. "You didn't have to take less than you deserved." "I did take exactly what I deserved. I took my peace. The mansion was beautiful but empty, like living in a museum. Here I have neighbors who bring casserole and friends I cook with, and someone who teaches me carpentry. That's worth more than marble floors." James smiled. "You're not what I expected. You're not tragic at all. You're just someone who decided to start over, and it's kind of amazing." Their friendship deepened. James started showing up for community dinners, garden work parties, no particular reason at all. Margaret teased Mary about it. "He likes you." "We're friends, Margaret. Friends who look at each other like that." One evening, the cabinets finally finished, James said, "I'm going to miss having an excuse to come over." "You don't need an excuse. You're always welcome." He looked at her seriously. "Mary, I'm going to be direct because we're both too old for games. I'd like to take you to dinner, not as teacher and student, as 2 people who enjoy each other's company." "I'd like that," she said. They went to a small Italian restaurant. At one point, James reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not trying to replace anyone or fix anything. I just think you're remarkable, and I'd like to keep getting to know you." Mary looked at their joined hands. "I'd like that too." Walking to her car later, Mary realized she hadn't thought about Robert once all evening. She had her small house and her garden and her friends, and now maybe something more. The last stop had become a new beginning. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 4 months after Mary had moved to Maple Street. "Mum, I'm coming home. I got transferred. The London office is sending me back. We'll be moving back in 3 weeks." Mary stood in the garden with tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Patterson hugged her. "Happy tears?" "The happiest. My son is coming home. Daniel called 2 days before his flight. Mom, Dad called. He wants me to stay at the mansion instead of with you. He said you don't have room, that it would be more comfortable." Mary's stomach clenched. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." "Mum, is your house really okay for all of us?" "It's not the mansion, Danny. It's small. 1 bathroom. But you're welcome here." Silence. "I'll let you know." The day of Daniel's arrival, Mary cleaned until the house gleamed. At 5 p.m., a rental car pulled up. Daniel got out, then Sarah, then the children. They looked at the house, at Mary standing with flour on her apron, and then Daniel smiled. "Mom!" He ran up and hugged her so hard he lifted her off her feet. "You came here," Mary said. "Of course. Dad's house is just a house. This is home." That evening Mary made dinner for everyone. Her small kitchen was crowded. Daniel and Sarah, the kids coloring, Margaret with cake, James bringing wine. It was chaos and perfect. Later, Daniel and Mary sat on the porch. Dad called while we were at the airport. He was angry I chose here. I'm sorry. Don't be. Mum, when you split up, I was angry at him but confused about you. Why did you give up so much? To protect you. I know that now. You didn't give up anything important. You gave up stuff, but you kept your dignity and your peace and your ability to build something real. Look at this. You built a community in 4 months. You're happy. Dad lives in that big empty house with his girlfriend and complains about being bored. There is a girlfriend then. There is. Her name's Victoria. She's 35 and she's nice, but wrong for him. My point is, you made the right choice. And I'm proud of you. You being here means everything to me. Wherever you are, that's where home is. From inside, they could hear Sarah reading to the children. It's not much, Mary said. It's everything, Daniel corrected. 6 months after Daniel's return, Mary stood in her backyard looking at the transformation. What had been overgrown and forgotten was now alive. The community garden had expanded. String lights hung between trees. A fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Today was the first neighborhood potluck, an idea that had grown into something bigger. People kept arriving with dishes and drinks and blankets. Marcus brought chili. Linda made bread. Mrs. Patterson contributed sauce. Daniel and Sarah set up tables while the grandchildren chased fireflies. James was at the grill. Margaret directed traffic. The backyard filled with people. As the sun set, someone started playing guitar. Mary moved through the crowd and at one point stood back just to watch. This small house, this modest yard, this simple gathering, it was everything. You look happy, Mom, Daniel said. I am, genuinely, completely happy. You deserve it. I think I should thank your father. If he hadn't blown up our life, I never would have found my way here. I spent 40 years being the woman Robert needed me to be. I forgot how to be just Mary. The next day, Robert called. I heard you're doing well. I made a mistake. With Victoria, with the divorce. I miss our life. I miss you. Maybe we could talk. Robert, I wish you happiness, but our chapter ended. I've started a new book and I like the story I'm writing. You're living in that dump. You can't prefer that. Mary looked around her kitchen, at the cabinets James had taught her to restore, at the table where she hosted dinners, at the window overlooking the garden, at grandchildren photos on the fridge. I don't just prefer it, Robert. I love it. I love my life. I love who I've become. And none of that would have been possible if you hadn't forced me to let go of a life that was slowly suffocating me. So thank you. She hung up. That evening, James came over. They cooked in comfortable silence. I love you, James said suddenly while chopping vegetables. Mary stopped stirring. What? I'm 68 years old. I don't have time to wait for the perfect moment. I love you. I love you too. He kissed her in the kitchen with onions on the cutting board and sauce bubbling. It was better than passionate youth kisses. It was two people who'd lived long enough to know what mattered. That night, sitting on her porch with James's hand in hers, Mary thought about the journey, from the courthouse to this porch, from divorce papers to grandchildren in her yard. She was 69. Small house, social security budget, thrift store clothes, old car, mismatched furniture, and she had never been richer because she had love, community, purpose. Family choosing to be near her from affection, not obligation, friends who valued her, a garden feeding neighbors, skills taught herself, confidence earned, happiness built with own hands. The mansion had been impressive. This was home. She'd learned sometimes the last stop isn't ending. It's where you finally start heading right. No regrets? James asked. Not a single one. In darkness, surrounded by neighborhood settling to sleep, Mary knew truth. She'd let go of everything she thought mattered and found everything that actually did. Sometimes that's not loss. Sometimes that's the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment with one word: resilience, courage, faith, strength, a word representing how this story spoke to you. She carried her suitcase inside, and set it down in what had been Daniel's bedroom all those years ago. The walls still had faded marks where his posters had hung. The closet door still stuck the same way it always had. She remembered standing in this exact spot 30 years ago, helping him pack for college, both of them crying because her baby was leaving home, even though he was 18 and ready, and it was time. That had been in this house, not the mansion. They'd moved to the mansion the year after Daniel left for college, when Robert's career had taken off and suddenly they could afford luxury. Mary had thought the timing was perfect, new house for a new chapter. But looking back now, she wondered if that's when they'd started losing each other. When the house got bigger, but the connection got smaller. She spent the rest of the day making the house barely livable. She found a hardware store and bought cleaning supplies, light bulbs, a few basic necessities. She scrubbed floors and windows until her hands were raw. She swept out years of dust and debris. She made the bathroom functional, and one bedroom clean enough to sleep in without a sleeping bag. By nightfall she was exhausted, but the house felt less abandoned. She'd brought it back to life just a little bit, just enough. As she lay in her sleeping bag that second night, she thought about what Margaret had said, about community, about not having to do this alone. Mary had spent so many years in that mansion neighborhood, where everyone was too busy or too important, or too focused on maintaining appearances to actually connect with each other, where asking for help was seen as weakness rather than wisdom. Maybe this could be different. Maybe she could build something here that wasn't just about survival, but about actually living. In the morning, she would start making calls. She would start accepting help. She would start building whatever came next. And she realized that despite everything she'd lost, despite the divorce and the betrayal and the uncertainty, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt hopeful. The next morning, Mary called Margaret's grandson Tom about the porch repairs. He came that afternoon, a 25-year-old with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. "This porch is pretty rough," he said honestly, "but it's fixable. The bones are good, just needs attention." They talked about what needed doing, what it would cost, what Mary could afford. Tom quoted her a price that was reasonable and offered to teach her some basics so she could help and save money. "I don't know if I'm capable of learning construction at 69, Mary admitted. "My grandmother learned to tile her bathroom at 75, Tom said. "If you're willing to try, I'm willing to teach." They started work the next day. Tom was patient, showing Mary how to remove rotted boards, how to measure properly, how to use tools she'd never touched before. Her hands got blisters that became calluses. Her back ached. But there was something deeply satisfying about fixing things with her own hands, about making something better through her own effort. Margaret started stopping by with lunch for both of them. Other neighbors began slowing down to watch, to chat, to offer encouragement. Mrs. Patterson from the community garden came by with tomatoes and an invitation. "We work Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings if you're interested. It's good exercise and good company." Mary showed up that Tuesday. The garden was more beautiful than she'd realized from the street. Rows of vegetables growing in neat raised beds, herbs in containers, flowers mixed in with the food plants, a small greenhouse with seedlings, and people, maybe a dozen of them, ranging in age from a young mother with a baby in a carrier to an elderly man who moved slowly but kept working. Mrs. Patterson introduced her around. "Everyone, this is Mary. She just moved back to Maple Street. Mary, this is everybody." They welcomed her without questions, just handed her gloves and showed her what needed doing. Mary found herself weeding a row of beans next to Marcus, the Iraq veteran. They worked in comfortable silence for a while before Marcus said quietly, "I heard you left a fancy place to come back here. That took guts." "Or stupidity," Mary said. "I'm not sure which yet. Courage usually looks like stupidity from the outside, but from the inside it's just doing what you have to do to survive." They kept working, and Mary thought about that. Survival. That's what this was. She was surviving the ending of her marriage, the loss of her home, the fear of starting over. And somehow pulling weeds in a community garden at 69 years old felt like exactly the right kind of survival. The weeks turned into months. The porch got fixed, and Tom moved on to helping with other small repairs. The house slowly became more livable. Mary bought furniture from thrift stores and yard sales. Nothing matched, but it was hers, chosen by her, paid for with her own money. She set up her small kitchen with dishes that didn't coordinate but worked. She hung pictures on walls, mostly photos of Daniel at various ages, a few landscapes she'd picked up at estate sales. She made the house her own, in a way the mansion had never been. The mansion had been decorated by a professional, everything coordinated and impressive and cold. This house was decorated by life, by necessity, by what made Mary happy rather than what would impress visitors. One morning, about 2 months after she'd moved in, Mary woke up and realized she felt at home. Actually, genuinely at home. Not just living somewhere, but belonging there. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten existed. That same week, Linda stopped by the garden looking lost. Mary recognized the expression, grief that hadn't quite healed, loneliness that felt permanent. The struggle of figuring out how to exist when the person you'd built your life around was suddenly gone. She knew that feeling intimately. They started talking, and by the end of the conversation they'd made plans to cook together. What started as a practical arrangement, two people who didn't want to cook for one, became genuine friendship. Linda was funny and smart and kind. She'd been a teacher before retiring, loved mystery novels, and made terrible puns that reminded Mary of Daniel at his worst. They fell into an easy rhythm. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays they'd cook together, alternating houses. They'd try new recipes, laugh at failures, celebrate successes. Sometimes other people joined them. Margaret with her stories of 3 ex-husbands, Mrs. Patterson with vegetables from the garden, Marcus with his famous chili, Yuki with her twins and her incredible Japanese dishes. Mary's small dining table became the center of a community she hadn't known she was building. People came not just for the food, but for the company, the conversation, the sense of belonging. And Mary, who'd spent so many years hosting elaborate dinner parties at the mansion where the food was catered, and the conversation was careful, and the whole thing felt more like performance than connection, found genuine joy in these chaotic, imperfect, deeply human gatherings. One evening, after everyone had left and Mary was cleaning up, she looked around her small kitchen with its mismatched dishes and crowded counter, and she smiled. This was what she'd been missing. This was what the mansion's marble floors and designer fixtures had never provided. This was home. Tom showed up one morning with his Uncle James, and Mary's life shifted again in ways she didn't expect. She wasn't looking for romance. She was 69 years old, recently divorced, still figuring out how to be alone after 4 decades of marriage. The idea of dating felt absurd, impossible, completely off the table. But James wasn't trying to date her. He was just trying to help with her cabinets, and somehow in the process, they became friends. Real friends. The kind of friends who could work together in comfortable silence, who could talk about everything or nothing, who could be themselves without performance or pretense. James had his own grief. His wife had died 8 years ago after a long battle with cancer. His children worried about him the way Daniel worried about Mary. He understood what it felt like to be treated like you were fragile when you were actually just trying to live. They worked on the cabinets for weeks. Stripping the old paint was tedious work that required patience more than skill. James taught Mary how to sand properly, how to feel when the wood was ready for stain, how to apply finish without leaving marks. They'd work for hours, and sometimes they'd talk about their lives, their marriages, their children, their grief, their hopes. Other times they'd work in silence, just the sound of sandpaper and the radio playing oldies in the background. Mary found herself looking forward to those evenings, not because she was falling in love, she wasn't, not yet, but because James made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. He valued her opinions, he laughed at her jokes, he listened when she talked, he treated her like a capable adult rather than someone who needed protecting. One evening they were sitting on the porch after finishing a section of cabinets, drinking iced tea and watching the neighborhood settle into dusk. Kids were being called in for dinner, dogs were being walked. Somewhere down the street, someone was grilling. "I like it here," James said. "The neighborhood or my porch?" Mary asked. Both, but I meant your porch specifically. It's peaceful. You're peaceful. Mary laughed. I'm a 69-year-old woman who gave up a mansion to live in a 1,200 square foot house. Most people would call that a breakdown, not peaceful. Most people are idiots, James said simply. You did something brave. You chose what mattered over what looked good. That's rare. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Then James said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Do you regret it? The divorce, the settlement, all of it?" Mary thought about that honestly. "I regret that my marriage ended. I regret that Robert decided I wasn't enough after 42 years. I regret that I didn't see it coming, didn't fight harder to save what we had. But giving up the mansion, no, I don't regret that at all. That house was beautiful, but it wasn't a home. This is a home." James smiled. "That's what I thought you'd say. You're remarkable, you know that." Mary felt her cheeks warm. "I'm just doing what I have to do." "No, you're doing what you chose to do. There's a big difference." As their friendship deepened into something that might become more, as the cabinets got finished and James kept finding reasons to come by anyway, as Mary found herself thinking about him when he wasn't there and smiling when he was, she realized something important. She didn't need a man to complete her. She'd learned that. She could build a life on her own, find meaning and purpose and joy without a partner. But that didn't mean she had to be alone forever. It just meant that if she chose to let someone in, it would be because she wanted them in her life, not because she needed them to survive. And James? She wanted James in her life, not to fix her, or save her, or complete her, just to be there, to share the good days and the hard ones, to work on projects together and sit on the porch at dusk and build something new that was just theirs. So when he asked her to dinner, she said yes. When he took her hand across the table at the Italian restaurant, she didn't pull away. When he told her he thought she was remarkable, she let herself believe it might be true. The last stop wasn't just about leaving the mansion behind. It was about opening herself up to new possibilities, new connections, new kinds of love that she'd never imagined at this stage of life. When Daniel called to say he was moving back, Mary cried so hard she had to sit down. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, concerned. "I'm perfect," she managed. "I'm just so happy." The 3 weeks before his arrival felt like preparation for the most important event of her life. Mary cleaned obsessively. She painted Daniel's old room a fresh, warm color. She set up the third bedroom for the grandchildren, buying twin beds at a thrift store and cheerful bedding on sale. She made space in closets and cabinets. She prepared, but she also worried. The house was small. The bathroom was tiny. There was only one shower. The kitchen could barely fit 4 people. Would it be enough? Would Daniel regret choosing to stay here instead of Robert's mansion, with its 5 bathrooms, and game room and pool? When Daniel called 2 days before arriving to say Robert had offered the mansion, Mary's heart sank. She told him the truth, that her house was small, but he was welcome. And then she waited. The waiting was agony. She tried to prepare herself for disappointment, for the possibility that comfort would win over connection. She wouldn't blame Daniel if it did, but when that rental car pulled up, and Daniel got out and looked at her house and her yard, and her with flour on her apron, and then smiled that genuine, unguarded smile and ran up to hug her, Mary knew everything was going to be okay. "You came here," she said, crying into his shoulder. "Of course I came here. This is home." That evening, cooking dinner for her son and his family in her small, crowded kitchen, with Margaret stopping by and James bringing wine and the grandchildren coloring on the floor, Mary understood something profound. The mansion had impressed people, but this house brought people together. The mansion had been about showing success. This house was about sharing life, and Daniel chose life over luxury. He chose connection over comfort. He chose her. Later, sitting on the porch with him while Sarah got the kids ready for bed, Daniel said something that healed a wound Mary hadn't realized was still bleeding. "I'm proud of you, Mom. When you and Dad split up, I was so confused. Why would you give up everything? But you didn't give up everything. You gave up stuff. You kept what mattered. Your peace, your dignity, your ability to build real connections. Look at what you've created here in just a few months. You have a community. You have purpose. You're genuinely happy. Meanwhile, Dad lives in that mansion with his 35-year-old girlfriend and complains about being bored. Mary had to laugh through her tears. There really is a girlfriend. Her name's Victoria. She's nice enough but completely wrong for him. But that's his problem now, not yours. My point is, you made the right choice, and I see that now. You being here means everything to me. Wherever you are is home, Mum. I finally understand that. From inside, they could hear Sarah reading to Emma and Michael, their sweet, sleepy voices asking questions. The neighborhood was settling into evening quiet. It was perfect in its imperfection. It's not much, Mary said, gesturing at her small house. It's everything, Daniel said. And for the first time since Robert had left her, Mary believed that might actually be true. 6 months later, the backyard had transformed from overgrown wilderness into a community gathering space. The garden had expanded with James's help. More raised beds built from reclaimed wood. String lights hung between trees, creating magic in the evenings. A fire pit made from salvaged bricks sat in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs collected from garage sales and donations. Today was the first official neighborhood potluck, though really it was maybe the 20th unofficial gathering. People just kept showing up at Mary's house with food and conversation and time. The official designation just meant they'd actually planned it this time. Marcus brought his famous chili. Linda made her incredible bread. Mrs. Patterson contributed tomato sauce from garden tomatoes. Daniel and Sarah set up a folding table, while Emma and Michael chased fireflies. James manned the grill, teaching Michael how to flip burgers safely. Margaret directed traffic with the authority of someone who'd organized 3 ex-husbands' lives and wasn't intimidated by a potluck. The backyard filled with people Mary had come to know and love. Neighbors from Maple Street and surrounding streets. People from the garden. Friends from the community college class. The book club Margaret had started. A tapestry of humans who'd been strangers 6 months ago and were now integral to her daily life. As the sun set, someone started playing guitar. Conversations flowed easily, crossing generations and backgrounds. Children played. Adults talked and laughed. Mary moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had food and drink, making introductions, facilitating connections. At one point, she stepped back to just watch. Her small house with its thrift store furniture, her modest yard with its mismatched chairs, her simple gathering with its potluck food and casual atmosphere. It was everything the mansion's catered parties had never been. It was real. "You look happy, Mom," Daniel said, appearing beside her with Emma on his shoulders. "I am. Genuinely, completely happy. Good, you deserve it. After everything Dad put you through. Actually, I think I should thank your father." "What?" "If he hadn't blown up our life, I never would have found my way here. I never would have learned that I could build something on my own. I never would have discovered that community matters more than square footage, that friends matter more than status, that being happy matters more than being impressive. I spent 40 years being the woman Robert needed me to be. I forgot how to be just Mary. This past year I finally figured that out." She looked around at the gathering. "I spent decades at that mansion feeling lonely in a crowd. Here, surrounded by people in my tiny yard, I feel connected. That's worth more than any amount of marble floors." Daniel hugged her carefully, Emma giggling on his shoulders. "I love you, Mum. I love you too, sweetheart." The next day, Mary's phone rang with a number she recognized, but hadn't heard from in months. Robert. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mary, I heard through Daniel that you're doing well." "I am, thank you." Silence. Then, "I made a mistake. With Victoria, with the divorce, with all of it. I miss our life. I miss you. I was thinking, maybe we could talk about reconciling. You could move back to the mansion. We could start over." "Robert, I wish you happiness. I genuinely do. But our chapter ended when you filed those papers on my 69th birthday. I've started a new book, and I like the story I'm writing now. You're living in that dump in the suburbs with thrift store furniture. You can't honestly tell me you prefer that to what we had." Mary looked around her kitchen, at the refinished cabinets James had taught her to restore, at the table surrounded by mismatched chairs where she hosted weekly dinners, at the window overlooking the garden that fed her neighbors, at the photos of her grandchildren stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, at the life she'd built from nothing. "I don't just prefer it, Robert. I love it. I love my life. I love my home. I love my community. I love who I've become. And none of that would have been possible if you hadn't forced me to let go of a life that was slowly suffocating me. So thank you. Sincerely, thank you for setting me free." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her heart felt light. She'd meant every word. That evening, James came over for dinner. Just the two of them, Daniel's family having gone to explore their new neighborhood. They cooked together in the easy rhythm they'd developed, moving around each other in the small kitchen like they'd done it for years instead of months. "I love you," James said suddenly while chopping vegetables. Mary stopped stirring the sauce. "What? I'm 68 years old. I don't have time to wait for the perfect moment or the right setup. I love you. You don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." Mary set down her spoon and turned to face him. "I love you too. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again, but I do." He kissed her right there in the kitchen, with onions half chopped on the cutting board and sauce bubbling on the stove. It wasn't like the passionate kisses of youth with their urgency and heat. It was better. It was the kiss of two people who'd lived long enough to know exactly what mattered and what didn't. After dinner, they sat on the porch in the darkness. James took her hand. No regrets? Not a single one. And sitting there in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of her neighborhood settling into sleep, dogs barking in the distance, the soft music from someone's radio, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, Mary knew she was telling the absolute truth. She'd let go of everything she'd thought mattered and found everything that actually did. The mansion with its marble floors and prestigious address, the designer furniture and catered parties, the appearance of success and the trappings of wealth. She'd let it all go. And in return, she'd found a small house that felt like home, a garden that fed her neighbors, friends who valued her for herself, a community that cared, a son who chose connection over comfort, grandchildren who ran through her yard with muddy feet and didn't care that nothing matched, a man who loved her not for what she had, but for who she was, skills she'd taught herself, carpentry and gardening and cooking and building, confidence she'd earned through doing hard things, peace she'd found by choosing it over everything else, happiness she'd built with her own hands, one small choice at a time. Sometimes the last stop isn't an ending at all. Sometimes it's just the place where you finally figure out what direction you should have been heading all along. Sometimes letting go of everything is the only way to discover what you were meant to hold on to. Sometimes the mansion you think you want is actually a prison, and the small house you're afraid of is actually freedom. Mary had learned all of that at 69 years old, and she'd learned one more thing, perhaps the most important thing of all. It's never too late. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to build something new. It's never too late to find community, purpose, love, joy. It's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. The world will tell you otherwise. People will doubt you. They'll call you crazy or stupid or irresponsible. They'll tell you to act your age, to be realistic, to settle for what you have. But you don't have to listen. You can choose differently. You can walk away from the mansion and toward the small house. You can trade marble floors for mismatched furniture. You can let go of impressive and reach for authentic. You can choose peace over possessions, community over comfort, happiness over status. And you can do it at 69 or 79 or 89, because it's never too late to reclaim your life. If this story touched your heart in any way, please leave a comment with just one word: resilience, courage, faith, strength, hope, whatever word represents how this story spoke to you. Because sometimes all we need is one word to remind us that we're not alone in this journey.